You're listening to the Talking Headways podcast network. This is Talking Headways, a weekly podcast about sustainable transportation and urban design. I'm Jeff Wood. This week we're listening in to a one-on-one conversation between MARTA's Deputy General Manager, Collie Greenwood, and Jacob Vallo, Senior Director of TOD, Real Estate, and Art in Transit. They chat about the agency's Bus Network Redesign and the TOD program. Stay with us. Today's podcast was produced in partnership with Railvolution. For a deeper dive on livability issues or more information about the annual conference live in Miami, go to railvolution.org. That's railvolution.org. Today's podcast is brought to you by our super generous Patreon supporters. Thanks so much for supporting the show. We really appreciate it. To join this merry band of zoning nerds and infrastructure wizards, go to patreon.com/theoverheadwire. $2 a month gets you a handwritten note and some stickers. $10 a month gets you one of our transportation scarves. I've just put in an order for more scarves, so soon you can choose between bus-only or bike-only scarves. Reserve one now by going to patreon.com/theoverheadwire. Fresh Kermit and fresh Elmo. Also, I'm hoping to have some pre-order forms up on the site soon for the scarves, so stay tuned. Also, because we do a lot of episodes covering a lot of books, we've partnered with bookshop.org as an affiliate. This means that if you buy a book through the Overhead Wire shop on Bookshop, a small amount of that purchase goes to us. Now, we love when you order from your local bookstores, but if you want to support the authors we have on the show and help keep us interviewing them, that would be tremendous. All the books we've ever discussed on the show with the authors are now in the shop. That's bookshop.org/shop/theoverheadwire. That's bookshop.org/shop/theoverheadwire. And finally, check out the Overhead Wire Daily Newsletter, established in 2006. We were doing it way before anyone else thought it was cool. Join thousands of readers and sign up for a 2-week trial at theoverheadwire.com to check it out. That's a 2-week free trial at theoverheadwire.com.
I'm happy to introduce Collie Greenwood. Collie is Deputy General Manager of Operations at MARTA. And Collie, we know you have vast experience in transit operations. I'm eager to hear today more about how you structured the bus system redesign in Atlanta.
Well, thank you, Jacob, and I'm happy to be here. And in turn, I would like to introduce you, Jacob Vallo, who is the Senior Director of Transit-Oriented Development here at MARTA, as well as in charge of Real Estate and Art in Transit. And Jacob, I think it's fair to say that we want to hear about transit-oriented development and maybe especially how it's changing to address displacement.
That's great. Thanks, Collie. I'm happy to be with you. I am on Railvolution's National Steering Committee, and we are very grateful for your time today. Railvolution is all about innovating and sharing ways to get better outcomes for communities from the projects that we do. I want to ask, before we get too deep into this, what is the big goal that motivates you in the work that you're doing? What fires you up about what's possible at this very moment?
Well, when you think about first thing in the morning and what is it that we do and why is it important? What strikes me, and this is maybe somewhat removed from the nuts and bolts of what we're doing, but it's this image of transit and what is possible. And frankly, in some cases, I think it is missing. It's this shared notion to me that our transit vehicles are carrying everyone, right? It's this vibrant microcosm of this happy collective, this representation of this fantastic city. And that as a rider, you get the sense that you're joined by others who choose to ride MARTA for all its benefits. They're proud to be a part of this pleasant atmosphere that's created by the managed environment, which is something I gather we will talk about a little bit more later. But it's also, it's created by the managed environment as well as the individual contributions of everyone on the vehicle or in the station. So I want to create that transit experience that grows ridership. It means delighting our existing customers with all those basics that are important for transit. And I know that might sound rather general at first, but those listening carefully will key into the transformative efforts required to achieve this. It's the basics, the consistent experience on the network, the safe, bright, and devoid of clutter. It's accessible by design to the system as well as on the system. It's also safe and it's reliable, and that whole metrics of performance, it all kind of flows into this desire to create something that is unforgettably important to this city.
I want to pick up on one of the things you said, which is how many people are involved and get touched by the transit system. And I think what's really of the moment is the fact that many of us have had a lot of experiences through COVID-19. And I think it's really impressed upon society in general just how important it is to be people focused in our work. And I've seen you do it on the transit side, and we're trying to do it on the transit oriented development side, that it's not so much about the sticks and bricks, it's more about the people and how you create emotions and feelings and joyful experiences for people in their lives. And right now, Collie and I are serving under Jeff Parker, our CEO, and he often likes to talk about what we're doing in the form of lines and dots, where lines are the transit component and the dots is the community development component. And so I'm excited to unpack this conversation with you, Collie, with you covering the lines and me covering the dots, but recognizing that the common denominator is people, and that all of this work is inextricably linked. So let's turn a little bit to more specifics around the transit system. And if we could talk a little bit about the bus system redesign project. Could you describe the steps you took to make sure the bus system redesign project started off with a deep understanding about Atlanta and its history?
Even before I get to that, when you talk about the people, you're absolutely right. So I'm going to go with pre-COVID statistics, but we're roughly about 400,000 daily riders on MARTA. So during the weekday. So when you think about the opportunity to affect someone's life and someone's quality of life, there are 400,000 opportunities every day for us 400,000 reasons for us to make this work. And so the bus network redesign, and I'm going to say about 50% of those riders are bus riders. So this bus network redesign comes at a good time and comes for a good purpose. And when I say a good time, clearly the transit industry and the country and the world are thinking about how to come back from the pandemic of COVID-19. And so the time for something that is an earnest look at how we serve the public, the timing couldn't be better, quite frankly. And as I said, 400,000 ridership, there's absolutely a call for this. It's not just going to affect just a few people. It's going to affect the way this city runs and operates for years to come. So we thought about that, and we thought, how are we going to structure this bus network redesign in a manner that really speaks to people that have been in Atlanta for a very long time, and speaks to people that are thinking about coming to Atlanta and those that are just here for the moment. And we thought about, first of all, let's collect the inputs, right? Let's get the opinions, the anecdotes, the data, and the desires of those that are using the system, as well as those that are planning the system and operating the system, those that are elected officials, the board members, the board of directors. No shortage of input, not only from the city of Atlanta, but the other areas that we represent, right? So the counties, DeKalb and Fulton and Clayton. There's all kinds of input that was available to MARTA. And then from there, we decided we were going to design the bookends of available options so that we can have a conversation about what it is that our stakeholders, our customers want most. I think like most transit agencies, we're faced with the reality that we have a finite amount of resource in terms of funding and equipment, and yet the possible conversations about what's important to our ridership are infinite. So we're going with two major concepts. We're designing a coverage concept and we're designing a ridership concept, both with equally impressive reasons for pursuing them. I wanted to address, one of the questions that you asked me is about how do you start off a project like that with a deep understanding about Atlanta and its history. And firstly and critically, perhaps ironically, I had to acknowledge that I myself was lacking in that deep understanding of Atlanta and its history. I arrived in the USA in July of 2019, so there's not a lot of depth of history with the city and the product, and quite frankly, not a lot of pre-COVID exposure to the city. But that outsider's perspective was actually very useful to me in identifying the needs for the insiders and my desire to apply their teachings to this body of work. And so that includes the physical, historical, racial, fiscal, and political landscape that we're working in. I was able to tap into energies and information from the city of Atlanta, DeKalb, Clayton, and Fulton, surrounding counties, the operations personnel and planning staff, as well as customers, our Riders Advisory Council, the MARTA Accessibility Committee, the Transformation Alliance, and the Partnership for Southern Equity. Both are instrumental in setting the tone and establishing the challenge for all stakeholders at the onset of this exercise and throughout. The challenge of really facing a landscape built on a racist framework and committing to an anti-racist result. So that's how we started. But the best part of this process is that it's designed to continue gaining insight, gaining feedback along the way as we shape the two divergent network concepts and engage with the public and the stakeholders in defining and enhancing their selected concept.
Yeah, I think the timing of your work that you mentioned earlier is so significant because, I think the intentionality, particularly in a city like Atlanta with the civil rights movement and the Black Lives Matter movement taking place, I think in focusing on the people and maybe what hasn't been done in the past but can be corrected going forward in this work, I think is really important. And I really applaud you and have enjoyed working with you because you brought a level of humility to this conversation, recognizing that you weren't knowledgeable of the city and its history, but were open to learning. I think is really awesome, and then translating that into your work. And where I saw that firsthand, we were working on project downtown, and you drafted something called the First Principles. I hadn't seen that much in the transit world, but I think it's a fantastic way of thinking, where you began to challenge the pre-existing assumptions and really broke the conversation down to the core elements that are important for us to work toward in terms of outcomes for the communities in which we serve. So if we could just talk a little bit more on this topic, why would another agency do this? Why is it important to approach a bus network redesign or corridor projects with this level of humility and first principles thinking?
That's a great question. I think I'm going to draw on the fact that there are agencies like Houston and Sacramento, Miami, Richmond, Columbus, all engaged or having engaged in a bus network redesign, and that's just to name a few, and all presumably for different reasons. In some cases, Jacob, I think it's population growth or population shrinkage and the reality of having to do more with less, that whole issue of tight budgets and limited resources. It's sprawl of the existing population or of the increased population, or changing patterns to and from previous destinations, or changing attitudes, right? I mean,
Sure.
our ridership profile changes. That's called progress. That's called time. And their attitudes towards distance of travel and length of travel time changes. And so I think to remain relevant, most agencies are going to have to refresh. And it starts with an earnest look at objective data. It starts with rethinking, let's stop chasing the goals that our foreparents were chasing. Let's stop for a minute and recognize that our customers are different, and really break it down to first principles of what they want and what we want in pursuit of supporting them. And so I think that's the driving force behind it, not to mention all the aforementioned reasons for change, but you really want to remain relevant. And if you just keep redoing what was already done, then you're moving further and further away from relevance.
Yeah, and you don't have that evolution process to get better. Yeah, for your customers.
Absolutely. I really want to emphasize the concept of freedom and access to transportation and what that means to people that rely on transit. And we take, for example, I like the example that our consultant uses, Jarrett Walker and Associates. They tend to talk about access in snippets. So if you take, for example, lack of a better term, a blob that kind of encircles someone's home, and you give it a 40 minutes from the home to any area inside of this blob, that means it takes them 40 minutes or less to get to work, to get to school, to get to the places that they like to socialize and places of worship. And that kind of freedom, if the transit system and the transit network is proficient enough to get them there within 40 minutes, that's a quality of life statement. Mm-hmm. If the transit system is ineffective, then that blob that would normally be served within 40 minutes may take 60 minutes, may take 80 minutes, 90 minutes, may make them relatively inaccessible. And that loss of freedom is what we have to contend with. And we have to make sure that when we design our networks, that we're taking that into account. I like the analogy of someone who's got access to a really fast sports car compared to the person that lives right next to them that takes the bus. But if the person that takes the bus can walk out of their home, get on the bus, get the transfer, and get to from point A to point B within 10 minutes, and the person with the really fast sports car has to wait for that garage gate to open, and it only opens once every 30 minutes, it starts to change between what we think of in terms of fast access to transit and what really is efficient access to transit. So we're keeping these concepts very alive as we go through the bus network redesign. We're talking not just about the corridor itself, but how it intersects with other services. And I'm really excited to see what that brings to the city of Atlanta when all those concepts are fleshed out.
Yeah, I love that. I think that, having freedom as at your core mission of the work that you're doing is, it's hard to have something greater than that to drive your work. So I love that.
But, Jacob, it comes to me at this point, I'm thinking, that's enough about me. What about you? And you're talking about, all the work that you've seen me doing, but quite frankly, I think it's fantastic the work you've been doing in the TOD space, and I'm just wondering if it's something that you would want to kind of share a little bit with everyone that's listening and give us a greater sense of what you're up to and what gets you out of bed energized for the work that you do.
Sure, no, I appreciate that, Collie, and going back to the initial comments, it's really just about serving and, seeing smiles on people's faces. That's really what gets me up in the morning, and I'm blessed to be here at MARTA with amazing colleagues and, our team in transit-oriented development. When I first arrived at MARTA 2.5 years ago, I sat down and we approached our work in a very mission-oriented manner in the same way that, our transit colleagues do, and that we want to better the communities in which we serve. And if we can do that through providing food, providing affordable housing, senior care on land that we own, then we're doing our part. So, we have been active in all aspects I just mentioned, and we're blessed as an agency to have a fairly robust land and air rights portfolio in which to lean into these community development aspects. And the TOD program at MARTA was started, at least the first TOD was done in 1985, but the program itself did not actually get formed and staffed until 2013. And since then, we've learned a lot. We delivered about 11 projects up to that point. And we're currently working on 18 projects. We have 2 under construction. We have several in procurement being negotiated with developers and many in planning. We've taken a pretty significant interest in affordable housing because that's where we think our work could have the biggest impact. And to that end, we recognize that, of the prior transit-oriented development work that had been done by the agency, we had not done any new investment or attracted developers to our south or west lines, which are predominantly Black communities. And so we pivoted about a year and a half ago, and at that time, the Federal Opportunity Zone program was put into place, and we have 7 stations that are in Federal Opportunity Zones, and went to the board and received approval to do TOD RFPs. And heretofore, the capital markets and the development community, for the most part, just ignored that part of our region. And so we're excited and to really push the work in those communities, but do it at a pace that the communities really want us to do. And going back to the people first approach and in the equity conversation, when you start to talk about bringing in new investment into communities that have been underinvested for a long time, there's a lot of fear. There's a trust gap. And so, we took it upon ourselves to do a fair amount of community engagement on the outset with elected officials, but also community members to really figure out like, what do you really need or want, and begin to design our RFPs around that feedback. And so the rest of the process oriented work that we go through procurement and negotiations, and that's all very important. But if you can't get the ingredients right on the front end and to be impactful for the communities which we serve, it's just not worth getting up in the morning. But yeah, that's what's getting me excited. The displacement conversation was certainly something that came out of those community engagement listening sessions. And because of the nature of TOD bringing in new investment, there's a lot of fear about property taxes increasing, property values increasing, property taxes increasing, and displacement occurring. And so when we looked at structuring our affordable housing guidelines for these particular TOD RFPs, we focused on delivering at the affordability level that was for the community. And what I mean by that is that we set targets that were tied to the zip code area median income, not the overall regional median income. And that was really important for the community, that we offered that in these particular communities, the deep level of affordable housing. We also increased from 20% to 30% the amount of affordable units that we're requiring be delivered by the developer in these particular projects. So not only do we increase the number of units, but we've also increased the affordability. But the flip side of that is two things. One is it creates headwinds with respect to capitalizing the projects. So we knew we had something to work on there. And then we also knew that it would take a long time to deliver these affordable units. And in many cases, these transit-oriented developments take 5, 7, 10 years to actually get through the entire process and open up. So we've focused our work on trying to solve both the capital issue as well as to be impactful in the short run with respect to affordable housing in our region before delivering the TOD RFPs to the marketplace.
What kind of financial partners are involved in this kind of a venture, and how are you working with housing departments?
Sure. So, with respect to displacement and wanting to do something in the housing space sooner rather than later, we felt it was incumbent to try to protect and preserve those existing housing units, affordable housing units that were around our station. So we began calling various institutions in New York and really sharing with them that, how important our work was to the community. But where we really needed help was to figure out ways to bring capital to the table to preserve the units around the station. And we were very fortunate and blessed that Morgan Stanley's Community Development Finance Group heard us loud and clear and shared with us a program that they've been running or operating with National Equity Fund, which is a subsidiary of LISC, across the country, but not in Atlanta. So we worked with them over a period of months to set up a Greater Atlanta TOD Affordable Housing Preservation Fund, whereby Morgan Stanley provided $100 million of a commitment to be managed by National Equity Fund to preserve those housing units around our stations. And so, we're really excited that that initiative was set up. It's currently operating. They're underwriting transactions now. Our hope is the first closing will occur in the next 60 days. But what that does is prior to our TODs being delivered, we're trying to bring some semblance of stability to the communities. And again, proud that Morgan Stanley thought the same way we did about trying to make that happen. And so that was really the short term, how do we do something short term solution? And then with respect to, capitalizing deeply discounted projects, we again reached out to capital partners in New York, potential capital partners in New York, and we're blessed to have Goldman Sachs' Urban Investment Fund step forward. That group is run by Margaret Anadu, who is amazing, and she, on our first call, asked, "What can we do to help?" And I just thought that approach was really cool, and so we shared with her and her team the challenges that we had to capitalize some of these deep affordable units. So, fast forward several weeks ago, we set up an initiative with Goldman Sachs Asset Management, of which Goldman Sachs Urban Investment Fund is a part of, explain the distinction, why it's important that the overall asset management group got involved. But they made a commitment of $100 million to vertical financing. And the benefit of what they bring is a lot of flexibility. So it really acts as gap financing. It's mission-oriented capital, and they're very creative minds that sit in that group to figure out the ways to move projects forward. So we're, again, very excited about having that initiative set up. The other component to the Goldman Sachs venture or initiative is that they had a strong interest, as well as we did, to advance the minority participation in TODs, where we haven't seen a lot of innovation in the minority sponsorship space, at least in the TOD world in our region. And we wanted to do something important, and so did Goldman. And Goldman had a 1 million Black woman initiative where they committed $1 billion per year for 10 years to support Black entrepreneurs, Black women entrepreneurs, and community developers. And they asked if that was something we were interested in having be part of this initiative with MARTA. And we welcomed it with open arms. And so the criteria of the capital to be deployed in the Atlanta region is first to go to Black women developers. And secondly, it's to Black and brown developers. And so we really thought that was an important component of the initiative. The other important thing that we did is we played partly housing advocate as well as sort of direct beneficiary of the capital, insofar as we set a criteria that projects that were eligible for the funding could be within a mile of the transit station, with the logic being that more density, the better for us. If there were projects that were shovel ready and were better projects that had a lot of density and had great sponsorship, as I discussed earlier, they should have the opportunity to access this capital. So we did open it up to allow for not just MARTA to participate, for developers that are going to develop on MARTA land, but also for other developers around our stations. And we think that bringing this capital into the Atlanta ecosystem is really important. The housing authorities are doing the best they can. The cities are doing the best they can with subsidies and other programs. But we just wanted to do our part and certainly had the ability to access resources like that. So, we do have, to your question about housing departments, Collie, we do have a partnership with the DeKalb County Housing Authority. And this is the first of its kind in our region where the transit agency has partnered with a housing authority. We know that other of our peers around the country do this quite often, but this is new for us. So the first project, which hopefully breaks ground at the end of the year or January, February of next year, will be 208 senior affordable units. And the housing authority is actually moving their headquarters into a small commercial building that would also be on site. But we hope that this becomes the blueprint for more work that we do, not only with DeKalb, but also with the Atlanta Housing Authority and some of the other jurisdictions in which we serve.
That's a lot of work, Jacob, and I think that's absolutely commendable. I really like, the idea of your being intentional about inequity, whether it's poverty or racial inequity, and your, the intentionality with which you go about doing your work. I think that's often one of the most difficult aspects of today's efforts at racial equity and justice, fighting the notion that, we should just move forward and not consider ourselves with the past and that nothing's wrong and we just have to be fair now. And I think it's just really important that we recognize that today's inequity is not just evidence of yesterday's problem, but it's the source of tomorrow's embarrassment if we don't do anything about it. So these days, you do have to strive for equity, but you also carefully have to convey to everyone that systemic inequity and its racist underpinnings are still real. And it's not a condemnation of individuals. It's more of a focus on the landscape that we happen to exist in, and then a commitment to move forward on each of these aspects. So my commendation to you for that.
I appreciate that. And I'll go back to our CEO's lines and dots and carrying that equity theme into the work that we're doing on, new corridor and transit projects. As we think about delivering transit in new corridors and the potential for displacement. And this is why I think Jeff and others and yourself, Collie, and myself are so focused on this, is that these two things are inextricably linked, and you can't deliver transit without thinking about displacement and what it's going to do to the people. And having the community development arm, in lockstep with the transit, planning, design is really critical, so that you have the ingredients of an equitable, transit development project.
Well,
And so I think it's a really exciting time, as to be here at MARTA, to doing the things we're doing, and look forward to doing more. And I'll just close with this: that we took a high level look at the range of work that's going on within MARTA, but also a little bit in Atlanta. So maybe we'll dip into the crystal ball for a bit. What's your vision for the next 5 to 10 years from now, for MARTA and your area of work?
I'm seized on something you said a moment ago, and I just wanted to follow up on that. And we were talking earlier about the importance of remaining relevant to your audience when it comes to equity, and when it comes to city building and building the kind of environment that we want for everyone. Our foreparents would think about access to food, clothes, and shelter, and that's kind of the battle cry that of years gone by. Now, those things are still important, but we also have to recognize that needs are changing and growing, and food, clothes, shelter, as well as education, energy, technology, and transportation are now to be considered things that we really have to strive for as basic needs for everyone. So, with that in mind, I do tend to think about the next few years, and I think it's important for MARTA to keep on the track that it's on. I think that we have to recognize that the shared appreciation for transit as part of our civic infrastructure is real. It can't just be the opinion of those of us that are in transit, but for those that we are hoping to entice to use transit. I look at things like the 5-point station transformation, and what that's going to bring to Atlanta. This bright, open, accessible, and modern aesthetic. I think about the vehicles involved in the next 5 or 10 years. So at 5 points, for example, below you'll have the CQ 400, our brand new open gangway train. It'll be technologically superior. It'll be customer centric in terms of its ride quality and information and systems. And then above, we'll have emission-free vehicles. We'll have BRT, and we'll have even the employees, the multi-purpose, proactive customer service ambassadors, actively linking customers to the service that we're proudly providing. It's my hope that in the next 5 or 10 years, you won't recognize the old place, that new riders won't believe that there was a time when pride and ridership were low, and that transit is actually valued as a social force and a beacon of the community that it serves. And those sound, like the kind of dream statements you would make for 5 or 10 years out. But when you think about what's involved in doing that, we're busily about making that happen with the projects that we've been talking about, and you may even be able to talk more about projects like Campbellton Road and how important that is, and how that's building towards this dream of ours that 5-10 years from now, we will have this network of service and this statement of value that we have for our customers that one might argue is not here in enough volume today.
No, I agree. And I think the Campbellton Road project you mentioned is an interesting project insofar as, it is one of our busiest, as I don't have to tell you this, our busiest bus routes.
Right.
And but and it goes through predominantly African American neighborhoods, and for the most part, those neighborhoods along that corridor have been underinvested for decades, and so as the planning process is underway for that corridor for the transit component, and this is what I see the future, and it's happening now at MARTA, where TOD is at the table, and we're talking about the best way to integrate various sort of elements of TOD and into the station area planning, into the where the siting of the stations, so that it can create the best opportunity to attract future capital and developers into the region. But even more so, if I had my crystal ball, I would love to have the opportunity to, when the transit's delivered, to actually deliver the TOD at the same time. And it's been something that, is, at least in our region, there's quite a bit of a time gap. And we do have multiple sites throughout the system that have been surface parking lots for a very long time. So the transit was delivered, but the balance of the economic development or the community development or housing has taken a long time, and it's in most part a capital markets problem, and we're trying to figure out ways to solve that so we can deliver density at the time that the transit is delivered. And I think that's what corridors like Campbellton really deserve, is for us to work really hard to deliver a comprehensive transit project that includes both the lines and the dots. So to execute the vision, what do you think is the most or the most crucial part of making that happen? Maybe it's one thing, maybe it's many things, but just love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think it is many things. I think it starts with a recognition that, whenever we talk about transit expansion from a corridor perspective, people often jump to rail, right? Because that's the high profile, high capacity answer. But quite frankly, bus is just so incredibly important in serving the future of this city. I think people have to recognize that heavy rail by itself, without the bus network, in today's MARTA, would only reach about 8% of the households, in our service area, and maybe just under 20% of the jobs. And by contrast, bus alone is reaching 50% of the households, about 50 to 55% of the jobs in our service area. So in terms of when we talk about access and relevance and usability, I think our future has to include bus, and bus has to be a part of the conversation whenever people are talking about expansion. And there's a tendency, I think, especially with the general public, to talk about rail. Even in terms of we talked earlier about making sure that we have a system that responsibly addresses the issue of poverty. So again, heavy rail is less than 10% in terms of reaching people in poverty, whereas bus is over 60% responsible for reaching people that are living in poverty today. So I think whatever we do next has to maintain this emphasis on the importance of developing, whether it's BRT, local bus networks, or just the bus network redesign and other projects like that. We really do have to support that. I think also the key things for the next era, Jacob, would be things like taking care of business today. I mean, today transit has to get our workforce back. I think everyone listening understands the urgency of that, not just in the transit industry, but in other industries across America. We need to commit funding that supports transit as that critical infrastructure. We talk about it the way we talk about water and lights. We should be able to reach for it and voila, it's there, but there is a price to be paid to making sure that reliability is always there. And I think, we just have to present the cleanest, safest, most efficient system that we can. We have to add value for our ridership as it returns, with bold and definitive plans and exciting competitive vehicles and stations and lines and dots, as you say. I think the next 12 months are key in all of that, in making sure that we set the stage for the return to what is normal for a transit rider and what they can expect.
Listening to what you're saying, I think that what I sort of gather from it is it's not a silver bullet solution. The path to success or successful outcomes is made up of many small wins and small movements, et cetera. And in many ways, I think about, not to be too geeky on this, but that when you think about quantum theory and how that's about really small things, relativistic physics is about really large things, but in essence, really large things are made up of really small things. And in many ways, having all of those things work together towards a consistent vision is really the magic, I think, in all of this. And so I appreciate your leadership and, our CEO and chief of staff and others to make sure we all come together in that common goal. And, if you were speaking to some colleagues in other cities, what would you most want to share, a tip or something that really works for you in your work? And if you could just share that with the audience.
To be honest with you, Jacob, I think what comes to my mind is the first thing I'd want to say to my colleagues is thank you. It's been a tough couple of years, quite frankly. And I think they would all say the same. We would want to thank each other for the collaboration. We just couldn't do this without each other. The American Public Transit Association, agencies, just my own personal network of colleagues and consultants, just engaged in this ongoing reciprocal, if you will, discussion that really works for each of us. I think I'd also acknowledge that the folks in the transit industry, I mean, they are all every bit as concerned and capable as we are. What I've learned after 33 years in this space is that the public transit industry is unique in that, we all want to see each other improve, and that there's some very talented people willing to collaborate and work together to address each other's challenges. We're not competing against each other. A success on the East Coast, a ridership gain or a disappointment on the West Coast is shared by all of us. And then finally, I guess I'd say, if they're listening, invest time in the conversations that matter most to your specific circumstance. So if it's funding, if it's public engagement, or getting the basics right, our existing customers have to understand that we're not just building the future for someone else that's coming along. We're focused on them, and we're building it for them based on their current experiences, and we intend to impress them along the way. I think that would be my message.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I think coming out, well, we're still in the pandemic, but I think what a lot of us have learned is we've all been humbled by this. And I think to some degree, it's a good thing. And that coming into our work, I think is really important. And again, focus us on the people first, but also the bare necessities, if you will. And I think transit, and to your earlier point, the transit industry in general, and I've only been involved for about 2.5 years, but was in the private sector prior to that. It is an unbelievably collegial environment where everyone is willing to share and help one another to uplift the entire industry. And I think, again, for someone who's new here, it's refreshing, and it's refreshing to serve along with everyone. And as we go forward and get through the pandemic, I do think that opportunities that we have through vehicles like Railvolution to share knowledge and learn from one another become even more important. And I think it's been exciting to continue to be part of Railvolution through the pandemic and stay connected, although virtual, because I love learning from the folks in this industry and actually those who aren't in the industry that want to share and have an interest in the work that we're doing. So, Collie, I just want to thank you for your time, and always enjoy talking with you, and appreciate your insight and your wisdom. And yeah, I just want to say thank you.
Likewise, Jacob, thank you very much. This has been a great experience for me. Suffice to say, I very much enjoyed myself. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Take care.
Bye-bye.
And thanks for joining us. The Talking Headways podcast is a project of The Overhead Wire and posted first at Streetsblog USA. Thanks to our wonderful Patreon supporters for sponsoring this show and Mondays at The Overhead Wire. You can support the show by going to patreon.com/TheOverheadWire. You can sign up for our 15-year-old newsletter at TheOverheadWire.com. And you can listen to the show on your podcatcher of choice, including Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio, and Apple Podcasts. And if you can't find it there, you can always find it its original home at usa.streetsblog.org. We'll see you next time at Talking Headways.